Welcome back to the book club. Today I'm going to be talking about my top 5 favorite fantasy series of all time at the moment as of August 14th at 4:43 p.m. 2025. So, I want to talk about my top 5. I'm also going to add on some honorable mentions at the end and some bonus series that are series I'm either currently reading or they're still currently being published that I think could potentially crack the top 5. But the top 5 right now includes only series that I've read through completely. I've read every book in them and the series is finished with maybe an asterisk that I'll get to once I talk about that book. So, let's get started. Coming in at number 5 is Cradle by Will White. This is a series that really frankly, it's the only progression fantasy series I've actually fallen in love with or enjoyed or even read all the way through. And when reading the series, I thought that I found a new gold mine of a subgenre that I could mine for all it's worth and get a bunch of enjoyment out of. And as it turns out, there actually weren't that many other books that I tried in this genre that I really enjoyed as much as Cradle. So I think that Will White's done something really special with this series. And I want to say I also enjoy his other work. I haven't read all of his series, but I did read the Traveler's Gate trilogy, and I'm currently reading his Lost Horizon, I think, or Last Horizon series that's coming out. So I've still been keeping up with the books that he's writing. And so I really do appreciate him as an author. And I think he does the all gas, no brakes style of writing really well. I've heard some, complaints maybe about the beginning of Cradle being a bit slow. I guess maybe it was. It's been a long time. That was the first book in the series I read. I maybe read it so fast and moved on to book 2 where things really do start to pick up that I kind of forgot about it. But to me, it's really like it epitomizes the all gas, no brakes, constant go, go, go. It is what I think watching anime is like, or certain types of anime. I'm not big on watching anime, so I don't know, but I've seen some episodes of Dragon Ball Z and it feels like Dragon Ball Z in book form where people are just constantly powering up, getting blonder and blonder hair, getting more and more jacked, and then eventually destroying worlds and, being heroes of the galaxy. So it was a very fun series. It's a nice long series that's very quick to read because the books are just they breeze by. It's not hard to read at all. And I think I read the first 5 or 6 books in the series over the course of less than 2 weeks, and I eventually caught up with where the series was and had to start waiting for the books. But I blazed through that series as fast as I could, and I do want to reread it because of how quickly I read through it the first time. But it has earned the solid number 5 place on my list as of now. Coming in at number 4, we've got The Wheel of Time. I just finished reading The Wheel of Time a few months ago at this point, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and I greatly enjoyed the series. That's why it's number 4 for me. I think Robert Jordan laid out an incredible epic fantasy series that Brandon Sanderson was able to push across the finish line to a lot of success, in my opinion. I've made a video about the first 11 books in the Wheel of Time, at least. I haven't quite talked about my thoughts on books 12 through 14. But my experience with the Wheel of Time was generally positive. And one of the reasons why the Wheel of Time isn't even higher on this list is primarily because I kind of forced myself to read through books 7 through 10, or maybe 8 through 10 is more accurate. Not as quickly as possible, but I was just hyper focused on trying to get through them because I knew that the story would pick up, and I really was aiming for that. And so I didn't enjoy those books as much, I think, as I should have if I let them breathe a little bit more. And that could be fixed in a reread, but for now, that's why Wheel of Time, as much as I loved it, is number 4 on my list and not even higher. It's just there was some slow books in the middle that some of the other series that are, higher up on the list that you'll see didn't actually have any of those slog points or slowdowns. I think the biggest crime that Wheel of Time committed is that after the big event of, I think it's the end of book 9 when Rand does the thing, being spoiler free here, but you'll know what I'm talking about. Rand does the thing, and then the next book, the first 50% of it is spent catching up all the other characters' plot lines to that one big event in the most boring way possible because the climax happened and then we're just doing a bunch of boring stuff leading back up to the climax again. I think if those books were structured a little bit better, maybe Wheel of Time would have been even higher on this list, but still it's a series that I'm never going to forget. It's an extremely memorable series. I think it's a favorite series of many out there, and I think it does a lot of things incredibly well. I really wish the TV show was better, because I think if the TV show was better too, maybe I would even, I would appreciate Wheel of Time even further into the future, because I could watch the show and remember what the books are like beyond just the three seasons that we have. But it is what it is. Wheel of Time is awesome. Shout out to all the Wheel of Time fans out there. You know who you are. And I hope to make some more videos on that series soon, actually, to sort of catch up the channel to some of the thoughts I have on the last three books and the Brandon Sanderson stuff and all of that. But if you haven't read The Wheel of Time, I don't even know if I would recommend it. I think that you should read a lot of other fantasy series first and then dive into The Wheel of Time, just because it is so long and so time consuming that I frankly feel like you're missing out on a lot of good books if you just dedicate yourself to reading The Wheel of Time first. But it is still an excellent series to read if you're deep into the fantasy genre as I am. Number 3, we've got The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. It's tough to choose which Brandon Sanderson series to include on this list, and I only wanted to choose one from each author for maybe obvious reasons. But I have read, I think, every Brandon Sanderson Cosmere book at this point. I might be missing, I haven't read the comic that came out, and maybe a couple short stories I'm missing, but all of his Cosmere novels I've read. And I guess for the purpose of this list, I'm considering the first 5 Stormlight Archive books as a finished series, even though I know it's technically going to be a 10-book series in 2 parts. But I think that the first 5 books is actually a, solid enough conclusion to the ending of this first part of the series that I can include it on this list and still maintain my finished series only theme that I've got going on here. So the Stormlight Archive, I'm a big fan of the books. This is, I know I said before that Cradle was something that dragged me back into Fantasyland. And after reading Cradle, I was looking for more fantasy to read. And that's when I started reading the Stormlight Archive. So I read, I think, the first 2 books in the Stormlight Archive, and then I swapped over, read Mistborn, and then started reading all of Sanderson's stuff. And so the Stormlight Archive really expanded my view of what epic fantasy could be, and also what modern epic fantasy looks like. Because prior to this, I had read Harry Potter and Game of Thrones, and I think I read The Name of the Wind by this point. But my fantasy, I wasn't well versed in the fantasy genre, or as well versed as I am now. And so the Stormlight Archive was really this amazing piece of world building, and the deep magic system and all the crazy stuff that happens in Shadesmar and all that stuff. It kind of became this benchmark where other fantasy series got compared to for a long time, until fairly recently. I still think when books have hard magic systems, I do compare them to Sanderson style magic systems, which is maybe not quite completely fair. I tend to appreciate both hard and soft magic systems, and I think some authors blend the two as well. But I always lean back on my, is this as good as Sanderson does it? Is it better? Is it worse? How does it compare? When there is a very rigid rules-based magic system that applies. Because I think that the way that he uses his magic systems to create story and limitations, and breaking those limitations, and sort of twisting your expectations of what can be based on the rules that you know, and the rules that you don't know, is very interesting. I think there's a lot of other books that do that thing as well, but Sanderson does it consistently. And I think the other thing to point out about Sanderson's books is that they're formulaic in the way that Marvel movies are formulaic, and I don't like Marvel movies. I'm not really into superheroes, so I haven't watched many of them. But I know that they sort of all follow the same expected formula, and Sanderson is the same way. He sort of builds up all of these various plot threads and then ties them together in his big Sanderson avalanche of a climax. And even though I know that that's coming, I'm still looking forward to it every time, because I don't know exactly what the twists he's going to pull are. I don't know exactly how he's going to get the characters out of the situation. It's not so predictable to me that I feel like it's boring. And frankly, I'm not really a reader that is trying to preempt the story, because I want to just I don't like to think that much about what I think will happen in the future. because I think that kind of takes away some of the magic of what the author is trying to do. But rather, once it does happen, I think about, could it have been done in a different way, or did that pay off in the way that the author was hoping for, and that kind of thing. So I try to analyze things after the fact rather than preempt them. So I know that there's some criticism that Sanderson gets for being predictable because of this pattern of writing that he has, but I still think maybe because of my reading style and because I just kind of let the plot happen to me and then analyze it rather than predict out what I think is going to happen very often. It works well for me, and I enjoy it every time. And I know that the avalanche is coming, and I still get caught up in it and end up, drowning in a pile of snow. I will say, obviously, I think a lot of people were disappointed by the last book in the Stormlight Archive. And I do agree that there's a lot of slow points relative to the other books. I think the series really peaked in the middle. Books 1, 2, and 3 were this constant rise. And then book 4 was kind of a little bit downward trend. And then book 5, maybe a little bit downward trend as well. But frankly, even the series at its worst is still better than a lot of other books, a lot of other fantasy books that I've read. So even though book 5 was maybe lacking and maybe was a little bit too long and should have been quite a bit shorter, or maybe not quite a bit shorter, but he could have cut a couple hundred pages probably. The thing's a behemoth. It's like 1,400 pages in this like massive hardcover book. I still think that the series is an all-time great, at least for me, for now in 2025. And I am looking forward to the part 2 of the Stormlight Archive series, the back half, whenever that starts getting written and whatever it's going to come out in another 5 or probably 10 years or whatever. Greatly looking forward to reading that. And for number 2 on my list is Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. Now, I've talked a lot about, Cradle and the Stormlight Archive being very pivotal books in my, adult fantasy reading journey. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is a series I read back in, I want to say 2015 or 2016, right around when I was graduating from college and entering the workforce for the first time. I wasn't reading that much fantasy at the time, and a coworker had recommended the series to me. And after reading Game of Thrones, I just didn't know. I'd read Game of Thrones when the books were coming out, when the 5th book came out, for example, 2011 or whatever. I didn't know what else to read. I wasn't really on the fantasy subreddit at that point, just looking at all the book recommendations and stuff. I had no ideas of what to read, and so for most of my college years, I didn't read anything. I probably just read Reddit and video game reviews and that kind of thing, and didn't read any fantasy books. And so a coworker had recommended both The Name of the Wind and Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn to me, and so I read both of those within the same year. I don't exactly remember because I wasn't using Goodreads at the time to track my stats, but the fact that I still remember Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn being an amazing epic fantasy journey, and I actually plan to reread it soon because I know Tad Williams, I think he's just finished somewhat recently the Austin Ard series, which is the continuation some years after what happens in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And I really want to read that with the knowledge of what happened in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, because I think, maybe it's just the way that memory works, but I rank this number 2 on my list, and I can barely tell you what happens in the book. I just know that over 10 years ago, I greatly enjoyed it, and that doesn't happen very often. I actually think more fondly of this book than I do of Game of Thrones, or A Song of Ice and Fire, and more than The Name of the Wind and some of the other books that I've read, before I was binging fantasy books all the time. And so I think because of that reason, I rated it very highly on this list, and I'm very much looking forward to not only rereading the series, but also continuing to read his last, his Austin Ard series, I believe is the name of the sort of the follow-up set of books in that same universe. So hopefully we'll see when I reread it. If I need to reevaluate my top 5, maybe I will, but just totally vibes alone, I'm rating Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn my number 2. It is actually a great, I think, intro to fantasy series for people that aren't maybe, they've read maybe some fantasy books before, like Harry Potter style books, but they haven't read any adults, real epic fantasy books. They've only read YA stuff. I think Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is a great introduction. Even though it does start a little slow, I still remember, a couple hundred pages of Simon being like a broom boy or something before the action really gets started. I think maybe that slow introduction could help people who aren't used to reading about epic fantasy books where characters are in bizarre worlds with weird swords and dragons and all that good stuff. So that's it. I love Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Hopefully, I'm not wrong about my opinion of it when I reread it, but we'll see. Time will tell. All right, and saving the best for last, number one on my current top fantasy series of all time, top favorite fantasy series of all time, whatever you want to call it, is none other than the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. I finished reading this book about a year ago now. I spent about a year in total reading the book, so I ended up reading a little less than one book a month for the year between 2023 2024. And this is like obviously because it's number one on my list, it's my favorite series of all time at the moment. And I think back when I was talking about the Wheel of Time and how there was a couple books that were a bit of a slog in between, that is something that the Malazan Book of the Fallen does not have, in my opinion. I think that although Memories of Ice maybe is what I would consider my favorite book in the series, and that's book 3, there is no bad book in the series. The lowest rated book in my mind, at least, in the series is still better than some most of the rest of my list, honestly. Like I would prefer to reread it than go back and read The Wheel of Time, for example, at the moment. So and also, you know, something is to be said about how well I still remember the series. I still know every book's name. I know at least at a high level what happened in each of those books. And my memory is very bad. So a lot of the fantasy series I've read, I can already barely recall what happened. Maybe I know the major plot points. I still know a lot of the Malazan stuff pretty well just because of how deeply ingrained in my brain it is. Maybe partially because of how well written it is as well. But it really struck a chord with me. I love the depth that Steven Erikson goes into throughout the series. He just kind of tosses you in there and says, "Good luck. I'm just going to tell my story, and you're going to experience it." I think the kind of philosophical points that he hits on are really interesting to think about, and they kind of give you things to introspect on about not only yourself but society and the structures of life and all of that stuff. And I think also just I've listened to a lot of the interviews that Steven Erikson has done with other people on BookTube or podcasters. I listened to the 10 Very Big Books podcast after I'd finished the series and just kind of like reminisced about what I had read in the books while they were going through it for the first time, and enjoyed all that content too. And they have a bunch of interviews with Steven Erikson too. And listening to the man talk, I'm always in awe of the things that he says, even when they are extremely mundane. But I think that all those things go into what make this series so great, and also make me look forward so much to the other Malazan books that I still haven't read yet. So I haven't read the Ian C. Esselmont books, which I've heard are very differently written than Erikson's Erikson's Malazan books. But also I haven't read the Carcanis trilogy or what's out of it so far. I haven't read the Karsa Orlong stuff. So I still have more of the Malazan world to get into, and it is just the 10 books are my top number one of all time. I did only review the first 3 on this channel, and maybe I'll do a reread at some point. And I'll go back and kind of fill in the gaps. But it is also the series that inspired me to create this channel in the first place. I didn't necessarily want to only become a Malazan person that only talks about that book. But I think because it inspired that in me, and also because of how well I remember the books and how fondly I look back on them, it is solidly in the number one place on my list. I have a feeling it's not going to move very far, and it will probably remain on this list for quite a long time. All right, and on to the honorable mentions. We've got Fluffy the cat, who's begging to be sitting on my lap right now, who's going to be joining me for now. So one of the honorable mentions, and actually, sorry, 2 of the honorable mentions that I think that I want to call out, because these are both trilogies that I think really nailed the ending so well that, again, I still remember the books really well in my head, and I recommend them to people, and I still think about them. I still want to talk about them. And a lot of trilogies end in an exciting way, but not necessarily this same exciting, memorable, like, whoa, my mind is blown kind of way. And these 2 both do that excellently. Say goodbye to Fluffy. He is purring up a storm over here. All right, so those books, number one, the Lycanius trilogy by James Islington. I'm looking forward to his Hierarchy trilogy as well, and maybe that'll end up on this honorable mentions list as well. But the Lycanius trilogy is a series where I felt like the first two books, maybe they were pretty good. Book two maybe had a bit of the classic trilogy book two stumble. But the ending in book three really brought things home in a way that blew my mind. I thought was very interesting. And I highly recommend it to anybody who is interested in, maybe you've read The Will of the Many and you want to read James Ellington's other work. I think Lycanius trilogy is definitely going to be up your alley and will definitely be worth it. And I think if anything, it speaks well to how capable he is of delivering on the promises, I'll say, that The Will of the Many brought on by the way that The Will of the Many ended. If you have read the book, you'll sort of know what I mean there. And the other honorable mention in this category is the Tide Child trilogy by R.J. Barker. This is another book, this is another trilogy where, actually, unlike Lycanius, I think each book is better than the last. It builds on it. And it's a very interesting world, a very cool, unique fantasy setting. It's boats and pirates, so that part's not unique, but just the depth of the world building is very unique. And also, the ending is, I guess, when you get to the ending and you like realize what he's kind of built up throughout the book, you're like, oh, of course, that's the only way it could have ended. Like, this all makes sense now. It's all coming together. And it's the kind of ending that just like puts a smile on your face because you're like, oh wow, like I didn't see that coming and I should have. Like, why did I not realize this until he's literally telling me what's going on here? And so because of that, the story still sticks out in my mind, even though I read it about a year ago. Blah blah blah. I have bad memory, but I still remember it very fondly. So it gets an honorable mention there. The next honorable mention, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the series at all, is the First Law world of books, I'll say. Not just the first trilogy or the Age of Madness trilogy or the standalones in between, but all of them as a whole. I've read all 9 of those books. I haven't read the short stories in, I think it's called Sharp Ends. I do have it, though, on my bookshelf, but I will get to that eventually. But I do think Joe Abercrombie is an excellent author. I read his Book of the Devils a couple months ago, actually, and that was very good as well. And he just does some of the best character work, I think, in the game. Who he kind of is up there with one of the other authors that I'm going to mention in a second. But I think that, this is kind of like a narrow, didn't make the list top series of all time, or, my favorites of all time. I love the First Law stuff. They were also some early books I read after the Stormlight Archive when I started getting into fantasy. I was kind of reading the top recommendations on the fantasy subreddit and that kind of thing. And you see Abercrombie mentioned all the time. Maybe less so nowadays, but certainly a couple years ago, he was being recommended in every single thread. And I think for good reason. And now that we've wrapped up the honorable mentions, we've got the bonus round. My cat is still on my lap and purring up a storm here. But for this bonus round, these are series that either I'm not finished reading yet or they're not finished being published yet. And so I can't put them on the list, but they might earn a place on my top 5. Number 1 is Janie Wertz's The Wars of Light and Shadow series. I'm 2 books into this 11-book series right now. It's awesome so far. And I've heard from a lot of people that have read it that are fans of the Malazan books as well, that people that like the Malazan books also end up liking this book, this series. And so we'll see as I read more of those books if I'm digging it as much as I dig the Malazan books. I've really loved the first 2 books so far. I think Janny's writing style is incredible. The way that it's definitely not the easiest prose to read. I think, I have to read it. It takes me a little bit longer to read her books than to read other books, but she chooses every word that she writes very intentionally. And I think there's something to be admired about somebody who clearly is dedicating the time and effort to write the book that tells the story that she wants to tell in a really deliberate way. The next bonus book is Ryan Cahill's The Bound and the Broken series. This is, I believe, 1 book away and maybe another novella away from being a finished 5-book series. And I've devoured the first 4 books. I read them as soon as I caught up with the series. I've been buying them as soon as they come out and reading them as soon as they come out. The first book in the series is certainly a bit slower than the rest of them, but this is an amazing epic fantasy series. I think for people that enjoyed Game of Thrones and they don't know what to read next, and maybe they're not a big fantasy reader, I think it's really easy to get into this world. And I think it is, although maybe it is a little bit tropey, which is a common complaint that I've seen, I don't necessarily think that's a problem, because I think tropes are only boring if you don't write a good story around those tropes. And I think that Ryan Cahill writes a very good story. And even though you have some of the classic Chosen One, Dragon Rider style of story, it is still unique in its own way. It's still doing things that other stories don't do. And he's still telling a story that is very good. I actually think maybe his books, his most recent book was the last time I cried while reading a book, which doesn't happen very often. But that is to say that even though other authors like Robin Hobb, for example, who, spoiler alert, I guess I'm going to talk about next, writes very emotional stories, it doesn't like evoke. Maybe it makes me angry at some characters, or like mad at them or sad for them, but I haven't actually like almost cried at a book since the most recent I can think of, at least, is the most recent Bound and Broken book, because of some of the emotional moments that happened between some of the characters. So I think that really goes to show not only like how solid the series is, but also how much Ryan Cahill has grown as an author from book one until now. Because I believe he said himself that like book one is intentionally smaller in scope because he was honing his craft. And once he started to improve his craft and get better and better at writing, he's expanded the story to fit that. And I think that approach has worked really well for him. And now, as I teased, the last but not least book I'm going to talk about here in this bonus round is Realm of the Elderlings. If you saw my last video, you'll know that I just finished the first book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, and I have previously read the Farseer trilogy about a year or two ago. And there's a bunch more books. I have 2 more Fitz trilogies to read. I have the Rain Wilds Chronicles, and I have 2 more Live Ship Traders books to read. So I've still got quite a bit of Robin Hobb to go. But she's one of these authors where if you look at her Realm of the Elderlings books, every book in the series gets like higher and higher ratings on Goodreads. Like it starts at like the low 4s and goes all the way up to like 4.5 plus for all 3 of the last trilogy. So I know that readers really appreciate this. I know that I'm getting into something that I think I'm going to really enjoy. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I think it has a pretty good shot of making it onto my top 5 once I actually read it and all is said and done. All right. And with that, that is my top 5 fantasy books of all time so far for me, asterisk, 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 plus my honorable mentions, plus my bonus round of series I haven't finished yet or aren't finished themselves yet. And as you can tell, it's been dark the whole time in my room. It's getting darker. So I'm going to wrap this video up, take a drink of water, and heal my sore throat. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, subscribe, hit the like button, do whatever. Leave a comment if you have any thoughts on my top 5. If you have your own top 5 that you want to share, or maybe just your favorite series of all time, let me know in the comments below. Not only am I, looking to bolster my to be read list, which is already too long to begin with, but also I would love to know if you guys have any thoughts on some of the books that I've read and enjoyed, and if you felt the same way or feel completely differently. Maybe you hate Cradle, maybe you love it, maybe you think Wheel of Time sucks. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.